The drive to Ryan's countryside house took longer than I remembered. The fields blurred into gold and green, the kind of summer haze that made everything feel softer and somehow more unreal. By the time I pulled into his gravel driveway, the late afternoon light had turned honey-colored, settling gently over the garden and the glint of the pool behind the house. He was already outside, barefoot on the patio, waving like we'd seen each other yesterday instead of after almost a year. "Elliot!" he shouted, voice full of that effortless warmth that always caught me off guard. I got out, trying to ignore how my heart sped up. "Still can't live without attention, huh?" I called back. Ryan grinned, arms open. "And you still drive like an old man." He hugged me before I could react. A tight, sun-warmed press that smelled of chlorine and the faintest trace of his cologne. It was the kind of hug that should have lasted a second, but didn't. When he finally pulled away, my skin buzzed like static. Inside, everything was exactly how I remembered. Open windows, music playing softly somewhere, the faint hum of summer insects. It was easy to fall into old rhythms. Unpacking my bag, laughing at his terrible jokes, pretending not to notice when he leaned too close to show me something on his phone. The space between us felt smaller than it used to. We sat outside with glasses of lemonade. The pool shimmered beside us, the reflection of the sky rippling across the water. I'd forgotten how peaceful this place was, the way it felt like the rest of the world had stopped existing. "So," he said after a while, tilting his head toward me. "How's city life? Still painting everything that moves? Mostly things that don't," I said. "It's quieter that way," Ryan smirked. "You always liked quiet." "I like loud," I smiled. "I remember." He looked at me for a moment too long, like he was trying to read something on my face. Then he leaned back, stretching lazily, muscles shifting under his t-shirt. The fabric clung for a second before falling loose again, and I hated that I noticed. I looked away, pretending to watch the breeze move through the trees. When I turned back, he was watching me. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, smiling. "You just look different. Older?" "Better," he said simply, and that word hung between us like the sunlight. Too warm and too close. I laughed it off, but my throat felt dry. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed him. The way he filled every space without trying. The way being around him felt easy until it wasn't. After dinner, we wandered down to the pool again. The air had cooled, the surface still and glassy. Ryan kicked off his shoes, dipping his feet in. "You planning to swim tomorrow?" he asked. "I didn't bring anything for it." He shrugged. "You can borrow a pair of shorts. Same size, remember?" I nodded, unsure why that simple sentence sent a strange flutter through me. The crickets started their night song, soft and endless. We talked about everything. His new job, my latest art piece, the people we used to know. At one point, I said something that made him laugh so hard he nearly spilled his drink. When he reached out to steady it, his fingers brushed mine. A light, accidental touch that shouldn't have meant anything. But my breath caught all the same. He didn't pull away immediately. His thumb grazed my knuckle before he looked up, expression unreadable. Then, just as quickly, he leaned back, pretending nothing happened. "You still overthink everything, don't you?" he said, teasing. "Maybe," I replied, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. The air between us felt suddenly different, not tense exactly, but aware. I wondered if he felt it too, this thin, invisible thread that seemed to stretch every time we spoke. The night deepened. Ryan stood, stretching again, and the hem of his shirt lifted just enough for the porch light to trace a faint line of skin at his waist. He tossed his empty glass onto the table. "You staying up? Maybe for a bit? Don't stay out too long. You'll end up overthinking the stars." "Very funny," he grinned, heading toward the house, then paused at the doorway. "It's good you're here, Elle." The nickname hit harder than I expected. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's good to be here." He disappeared inside, and the sound of his footsteps faded upstairs. I stayed where I was, watching the pool. The water reflected the night sky in fractured silver, the same way my thoughts felt. Scattered, restless. I tried to convince myself it was just the nostalgia, that it didn't mean anything, that he was still just Ryan, my best friend, my easy laughter, my safe place. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of his fingers against mine, and the way his smile had changed for half a second, as if he'd noticed the space between us too. I didn't know what any of it meant. All I knew was that it was getting harder to breathe whenever he was near, and harder still when he wasn't. And when I finally turned to head inside, I caught a glimpse through the glass doors, Ryan at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. For a moment, neither of us did. Then he smiled, small, almost shy, and disappeared into his room. I stood there a little longer, listening to the stillness. The night was thick with unspoken things, and I had the sudden, certain feeling that this week was going to change everything. And yet, beneath the quiet hum of crickets and the faint scent of chlorine, the space between us had already begun to shift, silent, invisible, and impossibly real. The morning sunlight slid through the curtains like a whisper. I woke to the faint sound of splashing outside and the low hum of Ryan's voice, a half-sung tune that drifted through the open window. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the unfamiliar room, his posters still pinned carelessly to the wall, and remembered the countryside, the pool, the strange electricity that had hung between us last night. I pulled on a t-shirt and stepped outside. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of wet grass and sunscreen. Ryan was already in the pool, cutting through the water with easy, practiced strokes. He didn't notice me at first. The sun caught the droplets on his skin, tracing his shoulders, his back, the curve of his arms as he moved, and then I froze. He surfaced suddenly, pushing his wet hair back, eyes squinting up toward me. "Morning, Elle. You're finally up." I tried to find my voice. "You're, already swimming?" "Couldn't resist," he said, grinning. "Come on, it's perfect." He splashed water at the edge, laughing. I could only manage a weak smile, trying not to stare but failing miserably. The pool water clung to him like light itself, his chest rising and falling, droplets sliding down over skin that shouldn't have made my stomach twist the way it did. I looked away quickly, pretending to admire the garden. "I didn't bring anything to swim in." He tilted his head, amused. "Didn't I say you could borrow my shorts? Top drawer, same as always." He said it so casually, like none of this meant anything, like he wasn't standing there. Sunlight turning his eyes the color of amber. I muttered something about breakfast and turned back toward the house, hoping the cool air might calm whatever this was inside me. But his voice followed. "Elle, seriously, come join me later. You look like you could use it." I didn't answer. My heart was already too loud. By midday, the sky had turned into a perfect sheet of blue. Ryan had dragged 2 deck chairs beside the pool, insisting we make a day of it. He tossed me a pair of his old swim shorts and smirked. "See? I told you I've got you covered." I held them up. "You never throw anything away, do you?" "Only bad memories," he said with that crooked grin. There was no escaping it. His energy, his ease, the warmth that filled every inch of space around him. I changed in the bathroom, staring at my reflection for a long second before stepping outside. Ryan was already in the water again, floating lazily on his back, eyes closed. "About time," he called without looking. "Thought you'd chickened out." "Just making sure your shorts weren't from when we were 15. He laughed, and I couldn't help smiling. I slipped into the pool, the water shockingly cool against my skin. For a moment, the world was quiet. Just the sound of ripples and distant birds. Then Ryan swam closer. "You still hate getting your hair wet?" "I've evolved," I said, trying for humor. He chuckled. "Good. Would have been a waste of water otherwise." We started playing around, splashing, laughing like we were kids again. For a while, the tension eased. The sound of his laughter was too easy to get lost in. But every time he brushed past me, every time his arm grazed mine under the surface, my body betrayed me. A jolt, a pause, an ache I didn't know what to do with. At one point, he dove beneath the surface and came up right behind me, hands gripping my shoulders lightly. "Got you," he said, voice close to my ear. I spun, water dripping between us, our faces suddenly inches apart. The sunlight caught on the edge of his jaw. His lips parted slightly as he caught his breath. For half a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, that same effortless grin, and let go. "You're getting slow, mate." I forced a laugh, even though my heart was hammering. "You cheat." "Not my fault you're distracted." He said it teasingly, but something in his eyes lingered. Something that made me forget how to breathe. We swam a little longer, both quieter now. The laughter faded, replaced by long silences that felt louder than words. Eventually, Ryan hoisted himself up onto the edge of the pool, sitting with his legs still in the water. I stayed below, watching the way the light bent across his shoulders. He looked down at me, squinting slightly. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Why? You're quiet." "Even more than usual," I shrugged. "Just tired, maybe." Ryan studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded and stretched, water glistening across his skin. "I'm gonna dry off. You want a towel?" "Yeah, thanks." He tossed one down to me, the corner brushing my cheek as it landed. I caught it, trying not to meet his gaze, but when I did, he was smiling again. Softer this time, almost curious. "Don't overthink it," he said gently. "It's just water, Elle." He walked away, towel draped over his shoulder, leaving me alone with the rippling reflections. Later, when the heat had faded, I sat at the edge of the pool, feet skimming the surface. The house behind me glowed gold in the setting sun. I could hear Ryan inside, humming along to some song I didn't recognize. Every sound, every echo of his voice, felt heavier than it should. I thought about the way he'd looked at me, the teasing, the silence, the almost accidental touches. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was all in my head. But the memory of that moment, his hands on my shoulders, his breath against my ear, it wouldn't leave me. He came back outside a few minutes later, hair still damp, a loose t-shirt clinging to his skin. He sat down beside me close enough that our knees almost touched. "Peaceful, isn't it?" he said quietly. "Yeah." He leaned back on his palms, looking out at the water. "I miss this sometimes. Just quiet. No pressure to be anything." I turned to him. "Do you feel like you have to be something?" He smiled faintly. "Don't we all?" For a while we didn't speak. The last of the sunlight faded behind the trees, leaving only the soft reflection of the sky. He shifted slightly, his knee brushing mine. "You think too much," he murmured. "I know." "Good," he said. "Someone has to." Our eyes met then. Not by accident, not quite on purpose either. I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. He didn't look away. For a moment, the world felt suspended again, like it had last night. Then Ryan broke the gaze, exhaling softly. "You'll get sunburned if you sit out here much longer," he said, standing up. "Yeah," I whispered. "Probably." He lingered for a second, as if he wanted to say more, then turned and walked back inside, leaving the sliding door open behind him. I stared at his reflection in the pool until it vanished into ripples. And in the echo of that silence, I realized the hardest part wasn't what he said. It was everything he didn't. Because sometimes, the quiet between words was louder than any confession could ever be. The rain came without warning. One moment, the afternoon sky was blinding blue. The next, thunder rolled across the hills, and the first heavy drops splashed against the pool's surface. Ryan laughed when it started. "Guess the weather decided to ruin our perfect day," he said, gathering the towels. "Come on, inside before you catch something." We rushed into the house, still half-drenched. He tossed me a towel and ran his fingers through his wet hair, water dripping onto the wooden floor. His shirt clung to his shoulders, transparent in patches, and I had to turn away to hide the heat that rushed to my face. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and chose not to say anything. We ended up in the living room, the rain tapping gently against the wide glass windows that looked out toward the garden. The air was filled with that soft scent of rain on warm earth, petrichor and something faintly sweet. Ryan flopped onto the sofa, stretching out like a cat. "Reminds me of when we were kids," he said, watching the storm. "Remember getting caught out by the lake that summer?" I smiled, toweling my hair. "You mean when you pushed me in?" He laughed. "You were being dramatic about getting your shoes muddy. I had to do something." "You nearly broke my camera," I said. "I saved it, didn't I?" "You dropped it again after," I reminded him, and he laughed so hard he nearly fell off the couch. I couldn't help but laugh too. It was impossible not to when he was like this. Carefree, glowing with life even when the world outside was gray. When the laughter faded, silence slipped in again, soft and heavy. The storm grew louder. Ryan turned his head toward me, his expression gentler now. "You still take photos?" "Not really," I said. "I paint more these days, slower, more controlled." "Sounds like you," he said with a smile. "Always careful, always thinking too much." "And you're still reckless," I countered. He shrugged. "Someone has to balance you out." We sat in that half-playful quiet for a while. He looked out the window again, eyes distant. "You ever think about how fast things change?" "Sometimes," I said. "Other times, it feels like nothing changes at all." He nodded slowly, then his voice softened. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. "Yeah, sometimes." "Yeah," he echoed. "Me too." Something in his tone made me look up. The easy smile he usually wore was gone. Instead, there was a quiet honesty, the kind you only saw when people weren't performing anymore. "I guess I just thought I'd have things figured out by now," he said. "You know, who I am, what I want, but the older I get, the less I'm sure." I felt something tighten in my chest. "You don't have to have it all figured out," I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time since I'd arrived, there wasn't any teasing in his eyes, just something searching, like he was trying to find the right words but couldn't. "Sometimes," he said slowly, I wish I could just stop thinking about what's supposed to make sense, and just feel things without worrying what they mean. The air between us changed in that moment. The storm outside softened to a steady drizzle, but inside, everything felt sharper. The sound of our breaths, the faint tick of the clock, the space between our knees that seemed to shrink without either of us moving. Ryan shifted closer, resting one arm along the back of the couch. His hand brushed my shoulder, lightly, almost absent-mindedly. But he didn't move it away. I froze. It wasn't a bold gesture, not really, but the weight of it. The warmth of his touch through the damp fabric sent a current through me that I couldn't name. I turned my head, just slightly, and found his gaze waiting for mine. For a heartbeat, everything went still. The rain, the world, even my thoughts. His eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. "Ryan," I began, but the word barely left my lips. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable but open, as if daring me to understand something he couldn't say out loud. Then his thumb moved. A small, unconscious shift against my shoulder, tracing the line of fabric. My pulse stumbled. It was nothing, it was everything. I should have said something. I should have moved, or laughed, or broken the silence. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. The air between us was alive, humming, full of the words neither of us had ever spoken. He leaned in. Not much, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath, the faint scent of rain and mint. My mind spun, and then, as if waking from a dream, Ryan blinked and sat back suddenly, his hand falling away. "Sorry," he said, voice too light, too fast. "Didn't mean to, I was just—" He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I'm more tired than I thought." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Long day," he laughed, but it was thin. "You should get some rest. We'll do something tomorrow. Maybe go for a drive, yeah?" "Sure." He stood, grabbed his towel, and walked toward the hallway. Halfway there, he stopped. "Elle? Yeah?" He didn't turn around. "Thanks. For listening. Always," I said softly. He nodded and disappeared up the stairs, leaving the sound of rain in his wake. I sat there for a long time after, staring at the empty space beside me. Everything still felt charged, like the air before a storm breaks again. I pressed my hand to the place on my shoulder where his had been, the ghost of his warmth still there. Outside, the storm began to fade, replaced by the quiet drip of water from the eaves. The house felt too big all of a sudden, too quiet. I told myself it was nothing. A moment, a misunderstanding, a trick of the rain. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted, and it couldn't be undone. Because when Ryan looked at me like that, when the world slowed and the space between us disappeared, the morning after the pool felt different. The air in the house carried a quiet heaviness, the kind that makes you notice every sound. The faint hum of the kettle, the drip of the tap, the shuffle of bare feet on tile. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-eaten toast I couldn't bring myself to finish. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, that image, that moment, replayed in my mind like a scene caught between disbelief and curiosity. I wasn't supposed to look. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. And yet I did. When Josh walked in, hair still damp from his shower, he gave me that half-smile, the one that usually disarmed me, the one that said everything's fine even when it wasn't. "Morning," he said, reaching for a mug. "Morning," I managed, though my voice sounded like it came from someone else. He moved around the kitchen with an ease that only made things harder. The way his t-shirt clung slightly to his chest, the faint steam rising from the coffee he poured. All of it felt too ordinary and too heavy at once. I tried not to look, tried to act normal, tried not to remember the way the world had gone still yesterday, how I'd turned away too late, how his eyes had caught mine across the water, and something unspoken passed between us. "You've been quiet," he said, leaning on the counter. "Did I do something?" My fingers tightened around my mug. "No, not at all, just thinking. About?" I looked up, and for the first time he didn't look away. His expression softened, like he already knew what I couldn't say. "About yesterday," I murmured. The silence that followed was almost kind, not sharp or uncomfortable, just suspended, like we both stood on a ledge, waiting to see who would move first. He nodded slowly, setting his mug down. "Right, that." Then to my surprise, he laughed under his breath, awkward, nervous. "Guess that was a bit weird, huh?" "Depends what you mean by weird." He looked at me then, really looked, and his usual confidence faltered. "I didn't mean to make things strange. I don't know what happened. You looked at me and..." He stopped, swallowing. Forget it. I should have said you're right, it's fine, but the words wouldn't come. Because it wasn't fine. Not to me. I stood up, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. Josh, you don't have to pretend. It wasn't nothing, he blinked, startled. What do you mean? You know what I mean. He exhaled through his nose, half frustrated, half defeated. You think I wanted you to see that? I hesitated. I don't know. Maybe part of you didn't mind. That silence again. Deeper this time. His jaw flexed, eyes darting briefly toward the window before settling on me. You're reading too much into it. Am I? I don't know what gave me the courage to ask, but once the words were out, I couldn't take them back. Something in his eyes shifted. Not anger, not shame, just something raw and unguarded. He stepped closer, and suddenly the space between us felt charged, electric. I'm not like that, he said quietly. You know that? Yeah, I said. I know what you say you are. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for something in my face. You're making this complicated. Maybe it already was. For a second it felt like we might laugh about it, that we'd both retreat behind humor like we always did. But he didn't laugh this time. He just stood there, close enough that I could smell the faint mix of soap and chlorine on his skin. What are you trying to say? He asked. I swallowed. I'm saying that I can't keep pretending it didn't mean anything. Because it did. At least to me. The truth hung between us, trembling like light on water. He didn't answer, just turned his head slightly, as though the weight of my words made it hard to breathe. I shouldn't feel like this, I whispered. Like what? Like I want to know what would happen if I said yes. His brows furrowed. Yes to what? To whatever this is. Josh's eyes softened then, but there was fear behind it too. The kind that comes when something familiar suddenly shifts into dangerous territory. He looked down, fingers curling around the edge of the counter. You don't get it, he said quietly. This isn't me. I don't do this. I know. Then why are you saying this? Because pretending doesn't make it go away. He turned back toward me, something flickering in his eyes. Confusion, longing, maybe both. You're my friend. I know, I said again. That's why it's hard. For a long time, neither of us moved. The kitchen clock ticked faintly in the background, each second pressing closer to something neither of us could name. Then Josh did something unexpected. He reached out, his hand hesitating mid-air before resting on the table beside mine. Not touching, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I don't know what this means, he admitted. I just know that when you looked at me yesterday, I didn't hate it. The words hit me harder than I expected. Simple, honest, vulnerable. I smiled faintly, even as my heart pounded. That's a start. He let out a breath, shoulders loosening just slightly. You really think so? I think. Sometimes things don't have to make sense straight away. He nodded slowly, like he wanted to believe me. The morning light caught his eyes, blue, uncertain, but open. And for the first time, we didn't fill the silence. We just let it exist, gentle and alive between us. Maybe that was enough for now. The space between what we said and what we didn't. The quiet question that neither of us had answered yet. What if I said yes? The rest of that day felt strangely quiet, not awkward, just delicate. Like every sound, every word could tip us back into what we'd barely held together that morning. Josh didn't bring it up again. Neither did I. We just went about the day, cleaning up the kitchen, throwing damp towels into the washer, pretending we weren't both thinking about the same thing. But there was a softness now, the kind that didn't exist before. When he brushed past me to reach for something, his touch lingered a second longer than necessary. When I laughed, he watched me like he was memorizing it. And every so often, I caught him staring. Not in confusion this time, but as if he was trying to understand a part of himself he hadn't known existed. By the time evening came, the house had fallen into that gentle twilight hush, the pool outside still, the faint hum of crickets filling the silence. Josh was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his elbows resting on his knees, scrolling through his phone. I hesitated in the doorway, watching him. The lamplight cast a warm glow across his face, softening his usual sharpness. He must have felt my eyes on him, because he looked up and smiled faintly. Hey, you okay? I nodded. Yeah, just thinking again. He chuckled quietly. You do that a lot. I moved to sit beside him, close enough that our knees almost touched. Can you blame me? He locked his phone and tossed it aside, exhaling. No, not really. The silence stretched between us, full but comfortable. For once, I didn't feel like I needed to fill it. Then he said, almost too softly, "I've been thinking too." "About?" He glanced at me, his expression uncertain. "About what you said earlier. About saying yes." My pulse quickened, but I stayed still, waiting. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep telling myself it was nothing, but every time I try to believe that, I can't." I looked at him, and something in his honesty made my chest ache. "Then maybe stop trying." He smiled faintly. "A small, nervous thing. You make it sound simple. Maybe it doesn't have to be complicated." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You know me. I complicate everything." "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "But maybe this time you don't have to." He turned then, really facing me. Our knees brushed, and neither of us pulled away. The air seemed to thicken again. Not with fear this time, but with something gentler. An understanding that words couldn't quite hold. "You ever think about what happens next?" he asked. "All the time," I admitted. "But I'm starting to think maybe we don't need to figure it all out yet." He nodded slowly. "You're probably right." We sat there side by side while the faint sound of water lapping against the pool drifted in from outside. The night had settled around us like a soft blanket, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to run from the silence. After a while, Josh leaned back against the sofa and let out a long breath. "This is new for me," he said. "I don't even know what I'm doing." "You don't have to know," I said gently. "You're here. That's enough." He glanced at me again, his eyes tracing mine like he was seeing something familiar and new at once. "You're too calm about this." "Inside, I'm anything but calm," I said, smiling. "I just don't want to scare you off." He grinned, a quiet, grateful kind of grin. "You're not scaring me." Something about the way he said it made my heart stutter. I could feel his warmth beside me, his hand resting on the cushion between us, close enough that one small movement could close the gap entirely. And then he did. Slowly, almost shyly, his fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't deliberate at first, just a test. But when I didn't move away, he let his hand settle there, overlapping mine just slightly. The world felt quieter after that, the kind of quiet that hums with everything unsaid. We stayed like that for a while, not speaking, just breathing, just existing. Two people suspended in a fragile, beautiful moment neither of us wanted to end. Eventually, Josh spoke again. "Where do we go from here?" His voice cracked slightly, like the question cost him something to say. I thought about it. About the risk, the fear, the 1,000 possible endings. Then I looked at him, really looked, and all I saw was someone trying to be honest, even when it scared him. "Maybe," I said softly. "We just keep walking. One step at a time." He smiled at that, small, sincere, real. "I can do that." "Good," I said, "because I'm not going anywhere." The faintest relief passed through his expression. He nodded, leaning back again, our hands still touching. The night deepened outside, the stars faintly reflected in the pool beyond the window. Inside, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just us. Two hearts quietly learning how to speak a new language without words. And as the silence settled around us again, I realized something I hadn't before. We didn't need to have all the answers. The fact that we were asking was enough. Morning arrived quietly, almost shyly. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, painting the living room in a soft gold that felt too gentle for what had changed overnight. I stirred on the sofa, the faint sound of breathing beside me grounding me in the moment before my mind caught up to it. Josh was still asleep, his head tilted toward me, his hand resting close to mine like it had never left. The blanket we'd shared had slipped halfway to the floor, but neither of us seemed to care. For a few seconds, I just watched him, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint crease between his brows that always appeared when he was thinking, even in his dreams. There was something strangely peaceful about it, about seeing him like this, stripped of the noise and bravado he usually carried. It hit me then. Something had shifted for good. Maybe quietly, maybe imperceptibly, but undeniably. When he finally stirred, blinking against the light, his eyes met mine. For a moment neither of us spoke, we just were. "Morning," he said, voice low and rough from sleep. "Morning," I echoed, smiling softly. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at the clock. "Guess we fell asleep here." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't mean to." "Me neither," he murmured, and then a small pause. "But I'm not sorry." That made me smile quietly. "Me neither." He sat up a little, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. "I was thinking," he said, eyes on the light filtering in through the window. Maybe we don't have to label this yet. Whatever this is, I nodded. We don't have to. Not today, Josh exhaled, relief softening his features. Good, because I still don't have the words for it. Maybe you don't need them, I said. Maybe just showing up like this is enough. He turned to look at me again, really look. And there it was. That quiet warmth that had been building between us for days now. Not uncertainty, not fear, but something calmer. Something true. You always say things like that, he said, smiling faintly. Like you've already figured it out. I haven't, I admitted. But I know what feels real. His eyes searched mine, as if testing that word, real, before letting it sink in. He didn't need to say anything. The way he looked at me was answer enough. A soft breeze drifted through the half-open window, carrying the smell of wet grass and chlorine from the pool outside. The world felt new, clean somehow, like it was giving us permission to start again. Josh stood up and stretched, yawning. I'll make coffee, he said, his voice lighter than it had been in days. I watched him move around the kitchen, the morning light catching his hair, his easy rhythm returning. But every so often, he glanced back at me. Small, fleeting looks that said more than words ever could. When he handed me my mug, our fingers brushed again. Neither of us looked away this time. Thanks, I said quietly. He nodded. You always take it black, right? Yeah, I smiled. You remembered. Of course I did. We sat side by side again, sipping our coffee in silence. But this silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, familiar. The kind that sits comfortably between people who've stopped pretending. After a while, Josh set his mug down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, he began, if someone told me a week ago that we'd end up here, like this, I'd have laughed. I would have too, I said. He turned his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. But I'm glad we did. I felt something bloom quietly inside me at those words. Not fireworks, not shock, just a steady warmth that filled every quiet corner between us. I am too, I said softly. He smiled, that lopsided grin that used to make my chest tighten for reasons I never admitted. But now it didn't hurt, it just made sense. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling across the water. The pool shimmered. That same pool where everything had started. It looked different now, though. Or maybe I did. Josh followed my gaze. Feels weird, doesn't it? How one moment can change everything. Yeah, I said. But maybe it's not weird. Maybe it's just life happening, he laughed quietly. You always find a way to make things sound poetic. Can't help it, I said, teasing. You bring it out of me. That earned me a faint blush, one he tried to hide by taking another sip of coffee. But I saw it, and maybe that was the best part. Seeing him let me see it. We didn't rush to define anything that morning, didn't make promises or plans. We just sat there, two people quietly learning the rhythm of something new. And as the light grew warmer, Josh reached over, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then rested his hand over mine again. Not testing this time, not uncertain. Just steady. He didn't look at me when he spoke. You're not going anywhere, right? No, I said, smiling. Not this time. He nodded slowly, his thumb brushing the back of my hand once. Soft, deliberate, sure. Something real had begun. Quietly and without fanfare. Not a grand confession or a perfect ending. Just this. Morning light, shared silence, and the gentle certainty that neither of us had to hide anymore. As we sat there, watching the sun climb over the water, I realized that sometimes the best stories don't end with fireworks or words. Sometimes, they begin with a simple truth whispered in the calm of a new day. I'm here.